Hi, so let's have a look at cubic and deadweight volume. The idea being there's only a limit, there's so much you can do with so little space. Now every truck has a capacity. If we look at what it takes to move items and get an understanding of how to charge for that, this will make a lot of sense. If we take a semi-trailer for example, it really doesn't matter what goes in that truck. No matter what, you can only fit so much inside. That's the volume. Now, in terms of that, there's a couple of other things we've got to keep in mind. There's a weight limit. Now, I can tell you straight away, the weight limit for a semi-trailer is 22 tons. Now, whether all of this here weighs 22 tons or it only weighs 3 tons, it doesn't really matter. There's still only that much space. But we could also look at it the other way, and I'll use the green texter. What if 20 tons only takes up this much space? You've got all the empty space that's up here. It doesn't really matter because you can only put the 22 tons in there. Now, how do we charge for that? How do we work that out? What does that mean in practicalities? So, I can tell you that to send this semi-trailer between Sydney and Melbourne might cost, let's call an arbitrary figure, $1,500. Now, we know what the maximum amount of weight is. We also know that there's only a certain amount of size we can put in there. So let's focus on the weight. 1,500 kilos, $1,500 divided by 22 ton works out to be 0.068 dollars, or let's call that 6.8 cents per kilo. So I can do that this way, 6.8 cents a kilo. So what that would tell me is that's our chargeable, if for 22 ton, that's chargeable. Now, I'm going to rub this out. If we look at the first example, whereby we've got our truck and all the stuff that's inside here only weighs 3,000 kilos or 3 tons. It still costs us the same amount of money, even though 6 cents a kilo on 22 tons, it still costs us the $1,500. Now we could work that out and go $1,500 divided by 22,000 kilos. Sorry, $1,500, I'm just testing you, divided by 3,000 kilos means it's actually 50 cents a kilo. So what's the right charge? Now, it's not really practical to work this out on an individual basis, on a box by box scenario. So companies like us and all transport companies work out a ratio that says if a box is this big, it's the equivalent of this many kilos. That's what we call a cubic conversion factor. It's really important to be able to work these out when it comes to costing freight out, so that we're giving someone something fair to look at. It's fair for the person that sends 22 tons or their product is really heavy and dense and small but heavy. But it's also fair for the guy that sends absolutely no weight at all, but it takes up a lot of room. If you think about it, to send a box of lead is going to be a lot heavier than to send a giant box of ping pong balls. So this cubic conversion factor is what we use to work out a fair rate. The most common conversion factor that you'll see is 250 kilos per cubic meter. So we take our box, which is 1 meter, 1 meter high, and 1 meter deep. We say that that's worth 250 kilos. It doesn't really matter how big that box, it doesn't really matter how heavy that box is. If it's got pillows in it, it might only weigh 3 kilos. But if it's got lead in it, it could weigh a lot more. Now, as a transport business, for every cubic meter we send, if we're trying to recoup 250 kilos worth of weight to charge for that, it starts to become a lot more even. This is where we start to lead into the idea of how does a customer get charged? Do they get charged on a kilo scenario, on a cubic scenario for the volume, or by the weight? Well, they get charged for whichever is greater. So I'll give it a real practical example here. If a customer sends something which is, let's call it a box size of 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters deep. So 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters by 50. And it weighs 10 kilos. There's a way that I can work this out to work out how much that customer should be charged. Should they be charged for 10 kilos or should they be charged on a volume? Well, we can actually work that out. My first step is to work out the cubic volume. So it's 50 centimeters times 50 centimeters times 50 centimeters. Gives me a cubic volume of 0.125 meters cubic volume. That's what the M3 is. Now, we said our conversion was 250 kilos per cubic meter. So based on that, I would take the amount of cubic meters, which was 0.125, times my conversion factor of 250 equals 31.25 kilos. Now, a little trick in freight transport, we always round up to the whole kilo. So that actually works out to be 32 kilos. So I can answer this question, and you should be able to too. When we look at how much weight to charge this customer for, which one's bigger? Do I charge them for 10 kilos or do I charge them for the 32? Of course, the 32. Now, alternatively, we could look at this a different way. All as I would have to do is change the weight of this, because let's say this first customer was sending pillows. I have another customer with the same size box that might send bricks. What if that same box or that same area weighed 75 kilos? How much do we charge the customer for? 75 kilos. That's the concept of cubic and dead weight.